Imagine walking through vibrant streets lined with centuries-old traditions, but beneath the surface lies a chilling reality, where being a woman means navigating a minefield of fear, judgment, and systemic injustice. Why does a land that worships goddesses fail to protect its women in the most basic ways? Stay with us as we unravel the complexities of a society caught between its rich heritage and its haunting truths. India, a land of vibrant culture and profound traditions, holds within its boundaries a contrasting reality, one that reveals a troubling narrative of gender-based violence and societal inequities. Amid its rich history, the country struggles with a harrowing truth. For many women, India is a place fraught with fear, repression, and systemic neglect. Behind its colorful facade lies a tangled web of patriarchal norms, oppressive customs, and institutional failures that perpetuate the suffering of half its population. The streets of New Delhi, once a symbol of progress and modernity, often become the stage for horrific crimes against women. The 2024 case of a female medical resident assaulted on the eve of India's Independence Day is not an isolated tragedy. It is a reminder of the grim reality faced by women in the world's largest democracy, a reality reflected in the 2018 Thomson Reuters survey, which ranked India as the most dangerous country for women. These findings are not hyperbolic. Reports indicate that a woman is sexually assaulted every 15 minutes in India, highlighting a culture where gender-based violence is both rampant and normalized. This pervasive danger is rooted in a complex interplay of historical and cultural factors. Patriarchy, embedded in India's societal fabric for centuries, grants men control over familial and societal decisions while reducing women to mere dependence. In countless households, daughters are seen as financial burdens, destined to marry and leave their natal homes. Sons, by contrast, are celebrated as heirs, bearers of family honor, and economic contributors. This disparity in value fosters an environment where women's lives are undervalued and often expendable. Beyond the household, the societal framework continues to impose rigid expectations on women. Dress codes, behavioral norms, and restrictions on mobility are enforced under the guise of maintaining dignity. Women who defy these norms, whether by adopting Western clothing or seeking independence, are viewed as transgressors, inviting moral judgment or worse, violence. This systemic control extends to public spaces, where women frequently face harassment, ranging from lewd comments to physical groping. In many cases, these violations are dismissed as trivial, with the blame shifted onto the victims for supposedly provoking such behavior. The societal perception of women as custodians of family honor further exacerbates their vulnerability. In this distorted framework, any perceived tarnishing of that honor, whether through consensual relationships, accusations of impropriety, or even acts of violence inflicted upon them, places the burden squarely on the woman's shoulders. She becomes a scapegoat for familial disgrace, often facing ostracization, punishment, or worse. These cultural narratives have ingrained a deep-rooted fear in women, discouraging them from reporting crimes or seeking justice. This fear is compounded by the inadequacies of the legal and judicial systems, which frequently fail to protect victims or hold perpetrators accountable. Many women are deterred from filing complaints due to bureaucratic hurdles, societal stigma, and the slow pace of legal proceedings. Even when cases reach court, the outcomes are often influenced by biases that undermine the victim's credibility, perpetuating a cycle of silence and impunity. These systemic failures create an atmosphere of helplessness, where justice feels out of reach for the vast majority of women. Amid this grim reality, India's cultural duality becomes starkly evident. On the one hand, the country celebrates goddesses and preaches reverence for womanhood. On the other hand, its societal structures deny women the autonomy and respect needed to lead dignified lives. This contradiction exposes the deep-seated contradictions that lie at the heart of the issue, contradictions that cannot be addressed through surface-level solutions. In this narrative, the intersection of psychology, sociology, and crime comes to the forefront. The psyche of a society that tolerates, and at times even condones, violence against women is shaped by centuries of patriarchal conditioning. Men, raised in an environment that reinforces their superiority, often perceive acts of dominance, whether physical or psychological, as their right. Similarly, women, conditioned to accept subservience, internalize blame and refrain from challenging oppressive norms. The question, then, is not merely why these atrocities occur, but why they persist despite growing awareness and advocacy. The answer lies in the intricate web of cultural inertia, systemic failures, and individual complicity. This story is not just about the victims of violence. It is about a society that collectively enables such violence through silence, indifference, and adherence to archaic values. Through these complexities, one truth emerges. The path to change begins with dismantling the very foundations that uphold inequality. It requires addressing the deep-seated biases that perpetuate gender-based violence, empowering women to claim their rights, and holding perpetrators accountable. It is a battle against not only the individuals who commit crimes but also the systems and beliefs that allow such crimes to flourish. In this struggle, the voices of survivors, advocates, and reformers form the chorus of hope, calling for a future where fear is replaced by freedom and dignity replaces oppression. This is their story, and it demands to be told. The roots of patriarchy in India stretch deep into its cultural and historical soil, shaping not only societal norms but also individual psyches. In this system, men are not just placed at the center of power, they are the architects and enforcers of it. This authority begins in the home, where boys are often celebrated as bearers of lineage and future providers, while girls are viewed as transient members destined for another family. This disparity sets the stage for lifelong inequalities, where a woman's worth is measured not by her abilities or aspirations, but by her compliance with prescribed roles. From an early age, children are conditioned to adhere to these roles. Boys are encouraged to assert themselves, take risks, and embrace leadership, while girls are taught to be docile, nurturing, and accommodating. This dichotomy creates a mindset that normalizes male dominance and female submission, perpetuating a cycle of control that extends far beyond the domestic sphere. As these boys grow into men, they inherit not just privilege, but the belief that their gender entitles them to authority over women. In many cases, this entitlement manifests in subtle yet pervasive ways. Women's choices, ranging from career aspirations to clothing, are scrutinized and often dictated by male figures in their lives. Those who deviate from these expectations frequently face societal backlash, labeled as rebellious or immoral. This judgment isn't limited to individuals. It is a collective response shaped by generations of adherence to patriarchal values. The pressure to conform creates an invisible, yet powerful, cage that restricts women's autonomy and reinforces the very structures that oppress them. At its core, patriarchy is not just a system of control but also a mechanism for preserving power. By relegating women to secondary roles, men consolidate their dominance, ensuring that resources, opportunities, and decision-making remain firmly within their grasp. This dynamic plays out not only within families but also in workplaces, political institutions, and public spaces, creating a ripple effect that perpetuates inequality on every level. For women in India, this reality often translates into a life of compromise and caution. Decisions as mundane as walking home at night or choosing an outfit become fraught with fear and societal judgment. The pervasive threat of violence, be it physical, emotional, or psychological, casts a long shadow over their everyday lives. Yet, these threats are not always external. They are embedded within the very institutions meant to protect and uplift women. Educational systems, for example, often perpetuate gender biases by discouraging girls from pursuing certain fields or fostering environments where harassment goes unchecked. Similarly, legal systems, despite their formal safeguards, frequently fail to deliver justice, leaving women disillusioned and vulnerable. The psychological impact of such a system is profound. Many women internalize these societal expectations, viewing themselves as lesser or unworthy of equal opportunities. This internalization not only stifles individual potential but also reinforces the cycle of oppression, as each generation passes down these beliefs to the next. On the other side, men who grow up in such an environment are often unaware of their privilege, perceiving their dominance as natural rather than constructed. This ignorance, coupled with societal reinforcement, creates a dangerous cocktail of entitlement and impunity. Yet, patriarchy does not exist in isolation. It intersects with other systems of oppression, amplifying its impact. In India, the caste system compounds gender inequality, creating a hierarchy within a hierarchy. Women from lower castes face dual discrimination, both as women and as members of marginalized communities. This intersectionality deepens their vulnerability, leaving them exposed to exploitation and violence with little recourse. The rigidity of patriarchal norms also exacts a toll on men, albeit in different ways. The pressure to conform to ideals of masculinity, strength, stoicism, and dominance leaves little room for emotional expression or vulnerability. Men who fail to meet these expectations are often ridiculed or ostracized, creating a toxic culture where dominance becomes the primary currency of respect. This dynamic not only harms individual men but also perpetuates a cycle of violence, as many resort to aggression to assert their masculinity. The challenge of dismantling such a deeply ingrained system lies in its ubiquity. Patriarchy is not confined to specific regions or communities. It is woven into the fabric of society, influencing laws, customs, and interactions on every level. Addressing it requires more than surface-level interventions. It demands a fundamental shift in attitudes and values, beginning with education. Schools must become spaces where children are taught to question stereotypes, embrace equality, and develop empathy. Families, too, play a crucial role in challenging traditional norms by raising sons and daughters as equals and fostering open communication about gender roles. The media, as a powerful shaper of public perception, has the potential to accelerate this change. By portraying women in diverse, empowered roles and challenging traditional narratives, films, television, and social media can reshape societal attitudes toward gender. Similarly, legal reforms must go beyond punitive measures to address the root causes of gender-based violence and discrimination, ensuring that justice is accessible to all, regardless of gender or socioeconomic status. Ultimately, the fight against patriarchy is a collective one. It requires not just the participation of women, but the active engagement of men, who must recognize their privilege and use it to advocate for change. This is not a battle of the sexes, but a shared journey toward a more equitable and compassionate society. While the road ahead is long and fraught with challenges, each step forward, be it a conversation, a policy change, or an act of defiance, brings us closer to a world where equality is not just an ideal but a lived reality. The shadow of honor-based violence looms large over India's patriarchal society, serving as one of its darkest and most brutal manifestations. At its core, this practice is driven by a deeply ingrained belief that the reputation and moral standing of a family are embodied in its women. When a woman is perceived to have deviated from prescribed social norms, whether by choosing a partner outside her caste, expressing autonomy in marriage, or rejecting traditional roles, her actions are seen as a stain on the family's honor. In such cases, extreme measures, including murder, are often justified as necessary to restore that tarnished reputation. Honor killings are not isolated acts of violence but systematic expressions of control, rooted in generational traditions that prioritize community reputation over individual lives. These murders are often carried out by the victim's closest relatives, parents, siblings, uncles, those who are supposed to protect her. The psychological betrayal is as devastating as the act itself. For the perpetrators, the logic is chillingly simple. By erasing the source of shame, the family's standing in the community is preserved. This distorted moral calculus not only justifies the act but also ensures its acceptance within the wider social framework. The psyche driving such acts is forged by years of conditioning in environments where collective identity outweighs personal agency. In such communities, a woman's choices are rarely her own. They are instead viewed as extensions of her family's values and status. A young woman deciding to marry someone of her choice, particularly if the man belongs to a lower caste or a different religion, is perceived not as an individual exercising her rights but as an act of rebellion against her family and culture. The societal pressure to conform is so overwhelming that families often choose violence over the perceived dishonor of accepting their daughter's independence. This system is further reinforced by the silence and complicity of the broader community. In regions where honor killings are most prevalent, neighbors, elders, and local leaders frequently turn a blind eye, considering such acts as unfortunate but necessary corrections of social deviations. This tacit approval not only normalizes the crime but also dissuades victims from seeking help, as they are aware that societal judgment will be overwhelmingly against them. For women trapped in such environments, the psychological toll is immense. The very notion of independence or personal freedom becomes fraught with danger. Decisions that may seem trivial in other parts of the world, choosing whom to love, what to wear, or where to go, are acts of defiance with potentially fatal consequences. This constant threat of violence creates a climate of fear and compliance, where many women internalize the belief that their safety depends on obedience to patriarchal norms. What makes honor killings particularly insidious is their intersection with other forms of systemic oppression, such as caste discrimination and religious intolerance. In India, caste often dictates the boundaries of acceptable social behavior, and transgressing these boundaries is seen as a direct challenge to the established order. When women from upper castes choose to marry men from lower castes, the backlash is not just a matter of family honor, but also a perceived threat to the hierarchical structure that sustains caste privilege. Similarly, interfaith marriages often provoke violence, fueled by both familial and political interests seeking to uphold communal divisions. The legal and judicial systems, while condemning honor killings, often fail to provide adequate protection to potential victims or deliver justice to survivors. The lack of proactive mechanisms to identify and prevent these crimes leaves many women vulnerable. In some cases, police and local authorities, influenced by the same cultural biases, are reluctant to intervene, allowing families to act with impunity. Even when perpetrators are brought to justice, the process is often long and fraught with challenges, including witness intimidation and societal ostracization of those who support the victim. The psychological impact of these crimes extends far beyond the immediate victims. Women within such communities grow up acutely aware of the consequences of defiance, shaping their behavior and aspirations. Many learn to suppress their desires and dreams, resigning themselves to lives of submission to avoid the wrath of their families and society. Meanwhile, men in these environments are taught to view their sisters, daughters, and wives as extensions of their own honor, perpetuating the cycle of control and violence. Despite the deep-rooted nature of this practice, there are glimmers of resistance and hope. Women's rights activists, non-governmental organizations, and even some progressive lawmakers have begun to challenge the societal norms that enable honor killings. Shelters for women escaping abusive families, legal advocacy for intercaste and interfaith couples, and education campaigns targeting patriarchal attitudes are slowly making inroads. However, these efforts are often met with fierce opposition from conservative elements, highlighting the uphill battle for change. Addressing the issue of honor killings requires more than just legal reforms. It demands a cultural shift that redefines the very concept of honor. True honor must be decoupled from control over women's lives and tied, instead, to values of compassion, equality, and respect for individual autonomy. This shift will not happen overnight, but it begins with education that challenges traditional gender roles and promotes critical thinking. Young men and women must be empowered to question the narratives that equate family pride with control over women's choices. In the fight against honor-based violence, storytelling plays a powerful role. Sharing the experiences of survivors, exposing the humanity behind the headlines, and amplifying the voices of those who dare to defy these norms can inspire others to question and reject the practice. Every act of resistance, whether it's a woman asserting her right to choose her partner or a community standing against an honor killing, chips away at the foundations of this oppressive system. The path to change is fraught with challenges, but it is also filled with possibility. Each life saved, each barrier broken, is a step closer to a world where women are no longer defined by the expectations of others but are free to live and love on their terms. Honor, in its truest sense, lies not in conformity to oppressive norms but in the courage to stand for justice and equality. For women traveling to India, the allure of its rich history and cultural vibrancy often comes paired with an undercurrent of caution. While many arrive eager to explore the iconic landmarks and immerse themselves in the traditions of the subcontinent, the experience is frequently shadowed by stories of harassment and an unsettling sense of vulnerability. This duality creates a complex reality where the beauty of India is marred by the challenges it presents to those navigating its streets as women, particularly foreign women who are often perceived as outsiders. In bustling cities like Delhi, Mumbai, and Jaipur, female travelers may encounter the uncomfortable gaze of men, often prolonged and unflinching. It is a gaze that feels invasive, as if their presence alone warrants scrutiny. For some, it escalates into whispered comments, unsolicited approaches, or even physical proximity that is deliberately invasive. These actions may seem minor in isolation but collectively create a hostile environment that leaves many women on edge. In smaller towns or rural areas, the sense of unease can intensify, as traditional norms and limited exposure to diversity often amplify the curiosity directed at foreign women. The psychology behind such behavior is rooted in cultural and social constructs. In many parts of India, a woman's appearance and behavior are seen as direct reflections of her moral standing. Foreign women, often uninformed about these unspoken rules, may inadvertently breach these expectations by wearing what is considered revealing clothing, walking alone, or engaging in casual conversations with strangers. To some men, these actions are misinterpreted as signs of availability or even consent, revealing a troubling lack of understanding about boundaries and respect. This lack of understanding is not born in isolation but is instead a byproduct of systemic issues within Indian society. From a young age, many boys grow up in environments where they witness or experience patriarchal norms that prioritize male authority and disregard women's autonomy. The limited emphasis on gender sensitivity or consent in education further perpetuates these attitudes. For men who lack exposure to diverse cultures or have internalized restrictive norms, encountering women who behave outside their expectations can trigger responses ranging from fascination to hostility. For the women who experience harassment, the psychological toll can be heavy. What may begin as a harmless journey to explore a foreign land can quickly turn into a battle to navigate public spaces safely. The constant need to assess risk, modify behavior, and deflect unwanted attention fosters a sense of hypervigilance. Some women report avoiding certain streets, dressing more conservatively, or refraining from venturing out after dark, all in an effort to avoid confrontation. These adjustments, while practical, also highlight a sobering truth. The burden of safety often falls disproportionately on women. The Indian government, aware of the reputational damage caused by these incidents, has made attempts to address the issue. Guides for female travelers, official advisories, and safety apps are promoted as tools to help mitigate risk. However, these measures often place the onus on women to adapt rather than tackling the root causes of the behavior. Advisories suggesting that women avoid wearing skirts, refrain from traveling alone at night, or avoid public transport inadvertently reinforce the narrative that women must conform to restrictive norms to ensure their safety. The legal framework, while robust on paper, struggles with enforcement in practice. Laws against sexual harassment and stalking exist but are often rendered ineffective due to delays in legal proceedings, societal stigma, and the reluctance of authorities to take complaints seriously. For foreign women, the additional barrier of navigating an unfamiliar legal system can be overwhelming, leaving many to opt for silence rather than confrontation. This systemic inaction sends a damaging message to perpetrators, emboldening them further. At the heart of this issue lies a disconnect between perception and reality. India, a country celebrated for its hospitality, diversity, and spiritual depth, risks alienating those who come to experience its riches due to the behavior of a few and the inaction of many. Female travelers often find themselves torn between admiration for the country's beauty and frustration at the social dynamics that compromise their experience. This dichotomy, while disheartening, also reflects a deeper struggle within Indian society as it grapples with modernity and tradition. The solution to creating a safer environment for women, both local and foreign, lies in a multifaceted approach. Education, particularly about consent and gender equality, must be prioritized from an early age. Men need to unlearn the toxic masculinity ingrained by societal expectations, replacing it with respect and empathy for women's autonomy. Public awareness campaigns can play a crucial role in redefining acceptable behavior in public spaces, challenging the norms that normalize harassment. Additionally, authorities must be held accountable for ensuring swift and fair justice for women who report incidents, regardless of their nationality. For foreign women visiting India, the journey can still be one of transformation and enrichment, but it must also be a journey of vigilance and adaptation. The strength of these travelers lies in their resilience, the ability to navigate challenging environments without losing sight of the country's unique charm. Many women who have faced harassment recount not only their challenges, but also the kindness and solidarity they encountered from strangers who stood against such behavior. These moments of connection and humanity underscore the potential for change. In reshaping its relationship with female travelers, India has an opportunity to project itself not just as a destination of cultural and historical significance, but as a place where women, regardless of origin, can explore freely and fearlessly. This transformation requires collective will and concerted effort, but promises a future where India's streets, markets, and monuments are remembered not for the challenges they pose, but for the stories of empowerment and wonder they inspire. It is a vision worth striving for, not just for the sake of tourism, but for the dignity and safety of women everywhere. The absence of comprehensive sexual education in India creates a significant void in understanding consent, relationships, and respect for individual boundaries. In many communities, discussions about sexuality are considered taboo, cloaked in shame and secrecy, leaving adolescents to navigate the complexities of relationships and identity without proper guidance. This silence not only perpetuates ignorance but also fosters environments where misconceptions about gender roles and relationships thrive unchecked. For most Indian families, conversations about sex and relationships are avoided entirely. Questions from curious children are often met with awkward deflections or outright dismissals, reinforcing the notion that such topics are forbidden. This reluctance to engage creates a generational cycle of ignorance, where parents who never received education about these issues are ill-equipped to guide their children. As a result, young people are left to piece together fragmented knowledge from unreliable sources like the internet, peers, or media, often leading to skewed understandings of intimacy, gender dynamics, and consent. The education system offers little reprieve. While biology classes may touch on reproduction in a clinical sense, the emotional, psychological, and social dimensions of sexuality are largely ignored. Teachers, themselves products of the same culture of silence, often shy away from addressing these topics with the nuance and openness they require. Female students, in particular, bear the brunt of this neglect. They are taught to view their bodies as private and shameful, their sexuality as something to suppress, and their primary role as upholders of familial honor. These lessons, though rarely explicit, are deeply internalized and shape the way young women see themselves and their interactions with the world. For young men, the lack of sexual education contributes to harmful attitudes about masculinity and entitlement. Many grow up in environments where traditional gender roles are reinforced, teaching them that dominance and control are hallmarks of manhood. Without education to challenge these notions, they may come to view women as objects of desire or subservience rather than as equals. This distorted perspective not only undermines healthy relationships but also lays the groundwork for behaviors that contribute to harassment and violence. The consequences of this systemic failure extend beyond individual lives, seeping into the fabric of society. Misunderstandings about consent and autonomy manifest in alarming ways, from the normalization of street harassment to the justification of marital rape. These attitudes, when left unaddressed, perpetuate cycles of inequality and violence that become deeply entrenched in the cultural psyche. Sexual education, which could serve as a powerful tool to disrupt these cycles, is consistently sidelined in favor of preserving cultural traditions that prioritize modesty over understanding. The societal resistance to sexual education often stems from a fear that such discussions will corrupt youth or encourage promiscuity. Yet, evidence from countries that have implemented comprehensive sexual education programs tells a different story. Young people who receive accurate and age-appropriate information about sexuality are better equipped to make informed decisions, engage in respectful relationships, and recognize abuse. Far from promoting risky behavior, sexual education empowers individuals to navigate their lives with confidence and respect for others. The absence of this knowledge is particularly harmful to young women in India, who are already at a disadvantage due to pervasive gender inequality. Without understanding their rights or the concept of bodily autonomy, many girls are ill-prepared to recognize or resist coercion, harassment, or abuse. This lack of agency is compounded by cultural expectations that discourage women from asserting themselves or seeking help. For survivors of sexual violence, the stigma attached to such experiences often prevents them from coming forward, leaving them to suffer in silence while perpetrators go unpunished. Beyond its role in preventing violence and abuse, sexual education also has the potential to foster empathy and understanding across genders. Teaching young people about the experiences and perspectives of others can challenge harmful stereotypes and build a culture of mutual respect. This is especially critical in a diverse society like India, where intersections of caste, religion, and socioeconomic status add layers of complexity to gender dynamics. By addressing these nuances in educational settings, sexual education can become a tool for promoting social cohesion and equality. However, implementing sexual education in India faces significant hurdles. Resistance from conservative factions, lack of trained educators, and inadequate curriculum design are just some of the obstacles that must be overcome. Efforts to introduce such programs are often met with backlash, labeled as Western influences or threats to traditional values. To counter this resistance, advocates must frame sexual education not as a deviation from cultural norms, but as a means of preserving the dignity and safety of all individuals. Highlighting its benefits in terms of health, well-being, and social harmony can help shift public perception and garner broader support. Despite the challenges, progress is possible. Grassroots organizations and activists have begun to fill the void left by formal education, conducting workshops and campaigns to raise awareness about gender equality, consent, and reproductive health. These initiatives, though limited in scale, offer a glimpse of what is achievable when knowledge is prioritized over fear. The stories of young people who have benefited from these efforts, who feel empowered to speak out against injustice, support their peers, or make informed choices, are a testament to the transformative power of education. India stands at a crossroads, where the choice to embrace or reject sexual education will shape its future. The stakes are high. The safety, dignity, and potential of millions of individuals depend on the decisions made today. To break the cycles of ignorance and violence that have plagued generations, the nation must confront its fears and invest in the education of its youth. It is not just about equipping individuals with knowledge, but about creating a society where respect, equality, and empathy are the norm rather than the exception. This is a vision worth striving for, a future where every individual, regardless of gender, can navigate their world with confidence, understanding, and hope. India's legal system, while robust in its structure and intent, often fails in practice to protect women from the very injustices it aims to address. On paper, the country has a range of laws designed to safeguard women's rights and ensure their safety. Yet, the chasm between legislation and enforcement has rendered these protections ineffective for many. This disconnect is not just a reflection of institutional inefficiency, but also a byproduct of deeply ingrained cultural attitudes that prioritize tradition and societal image over justice. The process begins to falter at the point of reporting. For many women, the decision to come forward after experiencing violence or harassment is fraught with obstacles. The stigma attached to being a victim often outweighs the potential benefits of seeking justice. A woman who files a complaint risks being ostracized by her family or community, labeled as someone who has brought dishonor upon herself and her loved ones. This fear of social alienation, compounded by a lack of faith in the legal system, deters countless victims from even taking the first step toward justice. For those who do report, the experience is rarely straightforward. Police stations, the initial point of contact for victims, are often intimidating environments. Reports abound of women being dismissed, belittled, or questioned about their character rather than their ordeal. In many cases, the focus shifts from the crime itself to the victim's behavior, with questions that implicitly blame her for the incident. What were you wearing? Why were you out at that hour? These inquiries not only trivialize the severity of the crime, but also reinforce the societal belief that women must bear the burden of preventing violence against themselves. The journey through the legal system is no less grueling. Cases of violence against women often face delays in investigation and trial, stretching over months or even years. For victims, this prolonged process becomes a second form of trauma, as they are forced to relive their experiences repeatedly during interrogations and court hearings. The slow pace of justice, coupled with the possibility of facing retaliation from perpetrators or their families, adds to the already immense emotional toll on victims. In many instances, this frustration leads to the withdrawal of complaints, leaving the perpetrators unpunished and emboldened. The judiciary, though independent in principle, is not immune to the biases that pervade society. Judges, like any other individuals, carry their own preconceptions and cultural influences into the courtroom. In cases involving gender-based violence, this can manifest in leniency toward perpetrators or skepticism toward victims, particularly if the latter's actions deviate from traditional norms. The legal system, rather than serving as a neutral arbiter, sometimes becomes a reflection of the very prejudices it is meant to combat. The issue is further compounded by the economic and social disparities that characterize Indian society. Women from marginalized communities, such as the Dalits, face additional hurdles in their pursuit of justice. Discrimination based on caste, religion, or socioeconomic status often intersects with gender-based violence, making these women particularly vulnerable. Their perpetrators, often from more privileged backgrounds, wield significant influence and resources, allowing them to manipulate legal processes or escape accountability altogether. At the core of these challenges lies a fundamental question: who is the law designed to protect, and whose voices are truly heard? In a system where power dynamics are skewed, justice becomes a privilege rather than a right, accessible only to those who can navigate its complexities and afford its costs. For many women, especially those at the intersection of multiple vulnerabilities, the promise of justice remains an elusive ideal. Yet, the failures of the legal system do not absolve it of responsibility. Instead, they underscore the urgent need for reform. At every stage, reporting, investigation, trial, and sentencing, there must be a concerted effort to remove the barriers that prevent women from accessing justice. Police officers must receive gender sensitivity training to ensure that victims are treated with respect and empathy. Special fast-track courts, dedicated to handling cases of violence against women, should be expanded and adequately staffed to minimize delays. Legal aid services must be made more accessible, particularly for women from marginalized backgrounds, to level the playing field. Equally important is the need to address societal attitudes that undermine the effectiveness of legal protections. Laws alone cannot change behavior. They must be accompanied by efforts to shift cultural norms and dismantle the biases that perpetuate gender-based violence. Public awareness campaigns, education initiatives, and media representation all play a crucial role in fostering a culture of accountability and respect. When society collectively recognizes that violence against women is not a private matter but a systemic issue, the legal system's role as an agent of change becomes significantly more impactful. While the road to justice in India is fraught with challenges, it is not without hope. The voices of survivors, activists, and reformers are growing louder, demanding accountability from both perpetrators and institutions. High-profile cases that have captured national attention have sparked conversations and movements that challenge the status quo, proving that change, though slow, is possible. The courage of those who dare to confront the system, despite its flaws, serves as a reminder of the resilience and determination needed to build a more just society. India's legal framework, though imperfect, holds immense potential to become a cornerstone of gender equality. But for this potential to be realized, it must evolve from a passive set of rules into a proactive force for justice. This evolution requires not just legislative amendments but also a collective commitment to creating an environment where every woman feels empowered to demand her rights. The transformation of the legal system, like the broader struggle for gender equality, is a long and arduous journey. But it is a journey worth undertaking, for it holds the promise of a future where justice is not a privilege but a guarantee for all. As the narrative of gender inequality and systemic failures unfolds, it becomes impossible to ignore the profound psychological toll on women in India. Living under the constant shadow of violence, discrimination, and societal scrutiny creates an invisible weight, one that shapes their identities, choices, and mental health in ways that are often overlooked. For many women, the act of merely existing within such an environment requires a resilience that is both extraordinary and exhausting. The psychological strain begins early. Girls grow up internalizing the messages imparted by their families and communities, that their worth is tied to their obedience, modesty, and ability to uphold familial honor. They learn quickly that stepping outside these boundaries invites consequences, ranging from ridicule to outright violence. This early conditioning creates a sense of self-doubt and fear, making it difficult for women to envision a life beyond the limitations imposed on them. Even those who dare to dream often find themselves haunted by the question, at what cost? This fear is not abstract. It is reinforced by the visible repercussions faced by women who challenge societal norms. Stories of honor killings, public shaming, or estrangement from loved ones serve as cautionary tales, warning others to comply. The emotional cost of this compliance is staggering. Many women suppress their ambitions, desires, and even their personalities to fit into the mold expected of them. Over time, this suppression can lead to feelings of helplessness, depression, and a loss of self-identity. In public spaces, the experience of being a woman is often one of hyper-awareness and vigilance. The mere act of walking alone can be fraught with tension, as women scan their surroundings for potential threats. The constant need to calculate risks, whether it's choosing a safe route home or deciding how to respond to unwanted attention, creates a baseline level of anxiety that becomes normalized. Over time, this state of heightened alertness takes a toll, leaving women feeling mentally and emotionally drained. For women who experience harassment or violence, the psychological impact can be devastating. Beyond the immediate trauma of the event, many are forced to contend with victim-blaming attitudes that further compound their pain. Instead of receiving support, they are often met with skepticism, judgment, or outright hostility. Questions about their behavior, why they were out late, what they were wearing, or whether they fought back, shift the blame onto them, leaving them isolated and ashamed. This societal response not only discourages women from seeking justice but also reinforces a sense of powerlessness, as if their suffering is both inevitable and deserved. In some cases, this isolation is exacerbated by familial pressures to remain silent. Families, concerned about their reputation, may urge women to move on rather than pursue legal action or speak out. This silence, though imposed under the guise of protection, often leaves women grappling with unresolved trauma. Without the opportunity to process their experiences or seek justice, many develop feelings of anger, frustration, and despair. These emotions, when left unchecked, can manifest as chronic mental health issues, such as depression, anxiety disorders, or post-traumatic stress. The intersection of mental health and societal oppression is further complicated by the stigma surrounding psychological well-being in India. Discussions about mental health are often shrouded in taboo, with therapy or counseling viewed as unnecessary or even shameful. For women, this stigma is compounded by the expectation that they should endure their struggles quietly, as resilience is equated with silence. This cultural narrative leaves many women without access to the resources they need to heal, forcing them to carry their burdens alone. Despite these challenges, stories of resilience and defiance also emerge, offering glimpses of hope amidst the adversity. Women who have faced unimaginable hardships, whether as survivors of violence, advocates for change, or pioneers in their fields, demonstrate the strength and courage required to challenge the status quo. These individuals, though often unsung, serve as beacons of possibility, proving that transformation is not only necessary but achievable. The path to alleviating this psychological burden lies in addressing both the systemic and cultural factors that perpetuate it. Mental health must be prioritized as an integral part of gender equality efforts, with accessible and affordable counseling services made available to women across all socio-economic backgrounds. Community support networks, led by Women for Women, can provide safe spaces for sharing experiences, offering validation and solidarity to those who feel unheard. Public campaigns aimed at destigmatizing mental health can further normalize seeking help, challenging the notion that suffering in silence is a virtue. Education, too, plays a critical role in reshaping attitudes toward mental health and gender dynamics. Schools must not only teach young people about consent and equality, but also equip them with the emotional tools to navigate relationships and conflicts in healthy ways. By fostering empathy and emotional intelligence from an early age, society can begin to dismantle the harmful narratives that fuel both gender-based violence and mental health stigma. The stories of women in India are complex and multifaceted, reflecting a spectrum of pain, resilience, and hope. While the psychological toll of systemic oppression is undeniable, so too is the potential for change. Every effort to address these issues, whether through policy reform, education, or community activism, contributes to a future where women are free to live without fear, to dream without limitation, and to heal without judgment. It is a vision worth striving for, not only for the well-being of women but for the betterment of society as a whole. The stories of women in India are as complex as they are heartbreaking, a testament to resilience amidst adversity. But change is possible, and it begins with awareness, accountability, and action. If this story moved you or opened your eyes to a side of India rarely seen, hit the like button and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of global issues that matter. What do you think is the most critical first step to combat gender inequality? Education, legal reform, or changing cultural norms? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice can spark the conversation that leads to change.